Hi guys, it's Fred here, and in today's video I'm going to explain why your injury rehab still isn't working even in 2026. So to start with, we need to break it down very simply. The number one reason you can't fix your injury is because you don't have a system in place to fix it. You're going around in circles with either random short-term bits of pain relief such as massage, getting your back cracked, getting some tape put on the injured area, or maybe you're just doing some really inconsistent physio exercises that you saw on YouTube or on Instagram, or that you got given by a coach or a physio. The first thing we need to define is what is a system, because in order to then break it down into how you can build out your own system to help fix your injury, we need to define what a system is. So a system has an input, very simply, a process, P, and then an output, O. And then from O, from the output, we get feedback. So input, what we're doing in terms of rehab or load. Process, what's actually going on in terms of what's going on in the body. And then output is a few different things. So for example, it could be a reduction in pain, it could be an improvement in mobility, strength, etc., etc. If you don't understand this very simple definition of what a system is, then you're going to really struggle in rehab, because once you understand this, then we can obviously change the input, then we can change, which then creates a different process, creates a different output, and then we get a different feedback loop. I'll give you an example, and this is one you might be stuck in. So the input is, to fix your injury, you're going to get a massage. The process is someone obviously giving you a massage, and the output is that you feel good for maybe a few hours or a few days. And then the feedback loop is obviously how long this is taking. So usually it's a few hours or a few days. Then you get the feedback, but then it doesn't last for a huge amount of time, and then you go back for another massage, and then it repeats itself. You know, there's loads of different examples of this. So that's a system broken down very simply. Now, to create an effective rehab program to fix any injury, we have three different types of systems. The first one is a macro system. So a macro system is looking at your rehab in months or even years. So it's the broadest system. And if we can start by defining your end goal, i.e. what the dream outcome is from rehab. So for example, it could be getting back to sport, it could be getting back to walking the dog, whatever it may be. Then we can reverse engineer what the process needs to be for rehab. So the macro system is in months or years. Then we have the meso system, which is in weeks, equals weeks. And so the meso system is on the next level down, and then you can see this in weeks, and this will be broken up into certain blocks, and one block will make up a certain amount of weeks. For example, with clients, I usually break rehab down into 5 to 6 phases. And so each one of these phases will contain a certain amount of weeks, depending on the injury and the person I'm trying to help and what they want to get back to. And this obviously varies massively depending on the injury as well. For example, if you've if you've torn your ACL and then you've got surgery, usually the time frame for ACL rehab is anywhere from 9 to 12 months. Same thing if you've ruptured your Achilles, that process is going to be a year or more. But if maybe you've just had a bit of tendon irritation for a few weeks, then this process might only be a few months, so it all depends. Then the next level of system, the next one down, is a micro system. So this is then in days. And obviously within each day, we then have the specific rehab sessions. And depending on how much time you can commit per week, you have X amount of sessions per week. So the minimum amount I usually give people is 3 sessions a week. And these can be anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. But obviously this massively depends on your end goal, but also what level you're at in terms of activity or sport. So obviously someone that is a semi-professional or professional athlete might be doing 5 or 6 strength sessions or running sessions on the pitch that could be, hours and hours per week alongside daily mobility. Whereas someone who just wants to get back to walking the dog, this might only be the bare minimum times 3 sessions a week, and then maybe with a little bit of 5 minutes of daily mobility. So this all depends on the person and the end goal. So now that you understand that, we can go into the specific components of an effective rehab program and how these fit into all these different systems. The macro system, which is months or years, the meso system, which is then in weeks, and then the micro system, which is in days, so the daily structure. So the first thing is education. And this is the only one that isn't a physical quality. All of the other components are going to be things like mobility, etc., etc. But education is the one you should start with, because if you don't understand potentially why you've gotten the injury in the first place and what the most effective method is to fix it and why this is the most effective method, then you're not going to buy into the system of rehab and you're not going to be consistent with it, and therefore you're probably not going to progress. So education in general around injuries, there's a few, let's call them first principles, or things that are just inherently true and that apply to rehab. The first one is that the body responds to load, or adapts to load, that's a better way to phrase it, adapts to load. And this is the same first principle as normal training when you go in the gym. Obviously, as you lift more and more weight each week on a particular exercise, your body has to adapt to that load, and therefore it gets stronger, more mobile, you get more confident, etc., etc. This is just a first principle of rehab, but of training in general. And so if we can do this gradually, appropriately and safely, then this is going to happen. The only way this isn't going to happen is if you're not doing your exercises and you're not sticking to the program. So that's something to bear in mind. The second first principle is that pain doesn't equal damage. Doesn't equal damage. So a lot of people think that during rehab, when they have flare-ups of pain, that this means that they have a massive setback and they think they're getting more damage at the injured joint. Well, there's been a lot of research on this, and in particular with back pain and lower back pain. So they took 2 groups of people. They took group A and group B. And they sent these 2 groups in for MRI scans of their back, so they could actually see what the damage was in terms of bulging discs and wear and tear, things like that. Now, group A went in to get scans. Now, before going in, they were reporting lower back pain. So they went in to get their scans, they came out, and there were some very mixed results. So even though they'd reported pain before going in, a lot of the scans didn't actually show any damage, and some scans did show damage. Group B didn't report any lower back pain or back pain before going in. They went in to get their scans, and actually some of the scans did show damage. And the reason these results are so mixed, and there wasn't a clear correlation or clear correlation between people reporting pain and damage at the lower back or the back, is because pain is a lot more complex than this. And pain can be influenced by 1,000,001 different things. Your sleep, your nutrition, your relationships, previous injuries, like this list just keeps going on. Stress at work, I could just keep going here. How much capacity your body has, how fit you are, God, a lot of psychological, biopsychological things. And so it's very hard to predict, and it's very hard to then therefore associate it with damage. And so that isn't true. And so that's just something to be aware of. So they're 2 really important principles. And then the final one, linking on from that, is that a little bit of pain is okay during rehab. So little bit of pain is good. So if you imagine a scale of 0 to 10, 10 is the worst pain imaginable. So let's say breaking your arm or getting hit by a bus. 0 to 10, and 0 is no pain. As long as you stay within that 0 to 2 to 3 out of 10 range, you're absolutely fine. So you don't really want to push above this number because that can cause a few issues. Now, obviously, if you've had an injury for a long period of time and your pain is just sitting well above this, then obviously if we can reduce that, that's a win. But for most people, if we can keep it between that 0 to 2 to 3 out of 10, that is great and that's perfect. And the way we can decrease pain during rehab, if you're struggling to keep it in that range, there's a few different ways. Number one is just to reduce the range of movement in a certain movement. So if you're doing a leg press, for example, reduce the range of movement by a few degrees. That can help, reducing the weight, reducing the sets, reducing the number of reps, all these different things. Or sometimes the exercise just doesn't agree with you and you can swap it out for an exercise that still gets the desired stimulus for that muscle group or movement, but it's just a different exercise and it fits and suits your body a little bit better. The next thing then, or the next important thing that fits into all these systems is a physical component, and it's joint function, which is pretty much just mobility. So obviously when you get injured, the joint that is injured or the area that is injured, you're going to usually lose some range of motion, lose some capacity, lose confidence in that joint and potentially the surrounding joints. For example, if you have knee pain or you have a knee injury, then usually you will have limitations in terms of range of motion, either bending your knee or straightening your knee. And then you might also get limitations at your ankle and your hip as a result of this. And so therefore rehab at a micro level, so the part of the micro system, daily rehab should be looking to restore movement at these key joints in the lower body. If we're talking about knee pain, for example. If you had a shoulder injury, then obviously it would be restoring movement at the shoulder, maybe restoring movement at the spine, restoring movement at your elbow, etc., etc. Now, how does that fit into our different systems? So again, we have macro, meso, and then micro. So if we look at this, over a period of, let's just say 6 months. Don't know if you can see that, you should be able to see that. So we got 0 here and then we got 6. Usually joint function, we look to improve joint function throughout this whole period of rehab, but it's a much bigger focus towards the early stages of rehab. So those first 3 to 5 weeks, because without restoring joint function, then we can't move efficiently, and if we can't move efficiently, then there's no point in building strength and power, etc., etc. Because it's a little bit like a pulley system. So if you imagine a pulley, if you have a frayed pulley system, so there's something wrong with the mechanism, no matter how much weight you use on the pulley system, it's going to keep fraying, and that's really the same thing with joint function. So that's a key component. The next physical key component is motor control, and this is just a fancy word for having the ability to control and use your joints, your body in a variety of different ways with coordination, balance, and doing the movements that you need in that sport or activity that you want to get back to. So for example, if you want to get back to running or sprinting, then obviously learning to walk first and learning to walk effectively would be part of motor control, then learning to jog a little bit better, etc., etc. And potentially looking to more specifically improve motor control at different joints as well, such as if you have a knee injury again, such as improve motor control throughout your whole lower limb, how your hip, knee and ankle work together cohesively to produce movement. So that's the next important aspect that fits into those systems. And in terms of how those things fit into a system on a basic level, so input, process, output, and then feedback. Let's use joint function quickly as an example. So the input could be 5 minutes of daily mobility. Let's say we're looking to improve hip mobility. The process is obviously you being consistent and doing the hip mobility. The output is improved range of motion through testing it. So we test it before and after. And then this links really into the feedback. The output is improved range of motion on the hip, and the feedback is really us testing this, knowing it works, and then we can look to go around and around again. That's a really good example, just to show you how it fits into the system there. The next physical component that's important is strength. So once we've built joint function and motor control, then we can start to look at a bigger focus on building strength. Now again, this is very specific to the injury, but as a broad rule of thumb, what I use as a baseline is at least 3 strength sessions a week in the gym, between 30 to 60 minutes. And these could be 3 full body sessions, which are looking at movements for the lower body and the upper body, or this could be split into a upper body day, a lower body day, and then maybe a full body day. If you have time to do 4 days a week at the gym, then this could be 2 lower body days and 2 upper body days. It just depends on the person and what their specific needs are. The next physical component is power. Don't know why I'm writing down. Power. So power is somewhere in between strength and speed. So really power is moving moderate weights very, very quickly. So you want to think about potentially some weightlifting movements if you've done those before, like a power clean or a snatch, something along those lines. So again, this would not be included as much early on in rehab. This would have a bigger focus towards the middle and the back end of rehab, because a lot of sports and a lot of activities require you to be able to produce power, but early on in the rehab process, it's not safe to have a big focus on this because it requires your muscles to work very cohesively together, and there's a lot of force going through the body, which we don't want initially. We want to be able to build up a base of strength before that. Then from power, we have speed. Now really, speed in my eyes can just be defined as plyometrics is a good example of speed. So a plyometric is jumping, change direction, things like that. So a plyometric is a takeoff and then a landing, and this is usually the landing time is usually less than 1 second. So it's fast, explosive jumping movement, sprinting, etc., etc. And again, speed has a much bigger focus towards the back end of rehab. I'm going to draw this out in a nice big diagram in a little bit, just to kind of put all these things together. The next thing is conditioning. So depending on the sport or activity you want to get back to, you need to have a certain level of conditioning to be able to handle the demands of that sport. So for example, in football, you need to be able to complete X amount of sprints per game effectively while still completing tasks that are required in football. So it's a mixture of the physical component of being able to run and having good cardio, but also the mental component of being able to sprint and change direction whilst also scanning, receiving the ball, passing, etc., etc. Conditioning in sprinting is very, very different. So if you're a 100-meter sprinter, then conditioning for this would be, we need to get you up to those high velocities, those fast paces in sprinting, and to make sure that you can handle that like you do in normal training. Conditioning is a big part of rehab throughout the whole process, but usually the differences between early, mid, and late stage rehab here is that early on, the conditioning is going to be very, very general and less sport specific. And then as we progress through rehab, it's going to get more sport specific. So early on, for example, if we're looking at a runner, the conditioning might be on a bike, on a rowing machine, or swimming to reduce the amount of impact that the person is going through. And then towards the mid stage of rehab and end stage of rehab, that's when we would bleed in and integrate more running sessions, starting off with a mixture of running and walking in some intervals, then going into some jogging for short duration, 20 to 30 minutes, and then looking to increase the volume and intensity by the back end of rehab so they're ready to hit the ground running. Then the last component that fits into this system is sport, which I touched on a little bit there, sport. And the sport has the biggest emphasis towards the late stage of rehab. So general qualities in early, mid-stage rehab, such as joint function, motor control, strength, and power, and then really speed and sport is going to be the bigger focus towards the back end. So with sport, this is looking at retraining those sport-specific movements. And we only need to do this towards the back end because sport-specific movements are usually just very technical. If we've built a good base of mobility, strength, and confidence, then you just need to retrain your brain to use to get back to doing these movements. So a good example is Olympic weightlifting. Towards the back end of rehab, we need to include movements such as the snatch and clean and jerk and variations of those, so the person and their body and brain knows how to do those things and the injured area is comfortable doing those things and they're confident in that as well. Confidence is a massive thing there. If we're looking to get back to football, then towards the late stage of rehab, they would be playing football. Not a full-blown game to start with, but they might be just passing the ball to someone. Then they might be in small game scenarios where they're playing 2 or 3 aside, and then we gradually increase it and make it more and more specific to what they want to get back to. So how this looks in a bigger time frame. Let's take 6 months, so a 6-month period of rehab, because that's quite a nice number. 0 and then 6. Yes, we can see that on the screen. So in terms of what we're prioritizing throughout this period, as I said, joint function is going to be a big focus early on, and motor control. So really this is movement and mobility, very simply. Then towards kind of the mid stage of rehab, really we're looking at strength and power. And then towards the back end, we're looking at speed plus sport, and then conditioning. Conditioning is just throughout the whole process, really. It's just getting more sport specific as we progress through. So joint function and motor control early on, strength and power, and then speed and sport. Now, what this isn't is just these things for this amount of time. It's just the focus for this amount of time. So what I mean by that is I still use exercises to improve joint function and motor control at the mid and end stages of rehab. It's just not the primary focus. So it's still there in people's program, but it's not the primary focus like it is in early stage rehab. Same thing with strength and power. It's the primary focus in mid-stage rehab, but we still do aspects of it early on. It's just not the primary focus. Hopefully that makes sense. And so we're doing everything all at once. We just have different focuses for each stage of rehab: early, mid, and late. And this allows us to get some great results with people, athletes, or people who are just looking to get back to doing really basic daily activities. Because we have those 3 systems that I talked about: macro, meso, and micro, with all these different qualities. And when you combine education and then all those physical qualities in a system like that, you can't really go wrong. Because again, we have input, process, output, feedback loop. And so we can very easily analyze where it's going wrong. Let's take another example here. Let's say we're in the middle of rehab and strength is the priority. So the input, let's say, is doing, let's say we've got a shoulder injury and the input is starting to do some pressing movements. So the input is pressing movements, or asking the client to do pressing movements. The process is them doing it. The output is that they're getting stronger. The feedback is that we're measuring this, and then we go round. We can easily see where something is going wrong. For example, I'm telling the client to do an exercise in a certain way. They're not doing it in that way because of potentially my fault, or they're just not doing it for multiple reasons, schedule, etc., etc. And so therefore we know where the issue is and we can just attack the issue versus just randomly doing exercises. This also works on a much bigger scale with the systems. So what I usually do is break rehab down into 5 different phases. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we use another 6-month example of rehab. Let's say someone's struggling with knee pain, and so each of these phases would take a certain amount of weeks. So for example, phase 1 could take 4 weeks, phase 2 4 weeks, phase 3 4 weeks, and then these two phases, phase 4 and phase 5, might take 6 weeks. And so if someone isn't hitting these timeframes, then we can very clearly see where the issue is. We can first of all look from a macro level and go, are we hitting the targets in terms of months, like each of these phases? And then we can go on to a meso level and look by week. Are they hitting everything weekly or are they not? And then we can break it down to a micro level. What sessions are they missing? What are they not quite understanding here? What do I need to do better as a clinician? What do I need to tweak? And then we can keep them on track versus just randomly doing some exercises for a few weeks and not really having a clear plan in place. So hopefully that was useful, just to break down what I think is a clear and effective system to fix any injury. If you do want some help about fixing your injury, you can book a free discovery call with me, if you want to call it that, via the top link down below.